Hey everyone, it's Dr. DeCubellis from Main Street Chiropractic, and today I am joined with Matt Herbeck. He is an attorney focusing on real estate law, all things real estate. So I wanted to have you in here because there's lots of questions involved with that, but it's also a very interesting segment in law that I think people don't really know a lot of the ins and outs with. So first, thanks for coming by.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here, and pleasure to hopefully add some information to random people around the area. So.
Sounds great. So first, tell us a little bit about how you got started.
Went to law school. Subsequent to law school, randomly ran into an old tennis teaching pro of mine, Robin Kramer, who obviously now Kramer and Herbeck is our firm. Ultimately, she had asked me what I was doing, if there was any sort of area of practice that I was already in, and if I needed a job, that kind of stuff. And at that time, I was not really avidly looking, but I was like, oh, this seems like a good possibility. I'd love to hear you out and see what it is. And obviously, some 11 years later now, we're working together, and it worked out great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great story. So why the specialty that you picked in law?
Part of it is when you go to law school and you come out of law school, you can do any sort of practice. So I could have been just a criminal defense attorney. I could have stayed and prosecuted with the state. I could have done really anything. Law school prepares you to learn an area of law and then hopefully enjoy it and whatnot. But real estate wasn't really at all on my radar. Funny thing is, though, my Real Property 2 class, I did Cali that class, which is the only time I think I've ever gotten a best grade on something. So it's just funny to look back now and be like, wow, I'm in the area that I actually did very well on. So it wasn't on my radar, but it was because I had known Robin, and it was a good opportunity, and I figured, you know what, let's give it a shot. So that's kind of how I got into real estate, and now I'm enjoying it enough to stay in real estate.
Right. It's funny how things work out like that.
It
you know?
is, yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So first, why does someone need a real estate attorney?
Yeah, I mean, I typically say the biggest reason is one of the biggest investments you're going to make in your life for most people. Buying a house, or even whether it's their own personal residence or investment property. Either way, it's obviously a substantial amount, whether you're paying cash for it or getting a loan. There's just so many ins and outs of real estate that, let's put it this way, that even attorneys outside of real estate will hire me in order to handle it because they're not even comfortable going through the process and taking care of themselves. So I say, if that's not a testament to why somebody should, to make sure that their interests are taken care of, it's important. I just think that to make sure that you're getting what you think you're supposed to be getting, and that there's no kind of fees that you're paying during the process that you shouldn't be paying. And that's really, I'm the only advocate for that buyer or for that seller during the process, really. So that makes a big difference generally.
Well, and you're signing a legal document.
Exactly.
It's always good to have someone look over it and make
know
sure.
what you're signing.
Yes, exactly. All right, that makes a lot of sense. Now, when in the process should you get in touch with an attorney?
Yeah, so the typical Illinois real estate, you use the 7.0 real estate contract, and that 7.0 real estate contract actually has an attorney review period built into it. So not that attorneys are slow, but we're not always the quickest in responding back. I try and pride myself on being responsive. However, we don't want people waiting to hear from an attorney to review an offer before they submit it. Because, again, especially in this market that we're in now, you don't have that time period to be able to wait and say, oh, I'm waiting for my attorney to get back to me. So what actually ends up happening is a lot of times they'll submit their offer, it'll get accepted. Once it's accepted, that's when a real estate attorney will get involved. So that will get forwarded over to me, whether it's by the client or by the agent. And ultimately, at that point, I'll open up a file and begin work on it, review the contract. The good news is because of that attorney review period that's built into the contract, if there's an issue with it, if there's any issue on the deal whatsoever, regardless of what it might be, aside from purchase price, I can cancel the deal. So if somebody all of a sudden is like, oh my gosh, I totally can't buy in that city anymore, or whatever the reason is, I can obviously go ahead and cancel that deal, and we can move them on to whatever their next endeavor is, essentially. But yeah, that's the good news is I don't have to be involved prior to. I'm happy to be involved if people do have questions about their offer or things like that. I am available to answer those questions also.
Now, is there anything specific that you've noticed that, hey, this is something that I've seen lots of problems here, or that's a theme almost that you'd say, I always have to look at this because this is where people can kind of get taken advantage of?
Yeah, well, I would say a lot of the times, I mean, because Illinois is different, we do a lot of things differently, including our property taxes. That's generally, I guess, the biggest area where things are not always right. I mean, I've seen, unfortunately, some attorneys that don't necessarily get those correct. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes too. But there's a lot of uncertainty about how it works sometimes. And unfortunately, that's an area where I explain to clients a lot about, hey, this is how your property taxes in Illinois work. We pay 1 year in arrears. I go through a bunch of different details with them so that they know they're going to be getting a credit if they're purchasing, or if they're selling, you've got to give a credit to the buyer. A lot of people are like, well, why am I paying for property taxes? Well, again, we pay 1 year in arrears. So those are typically the areas where I guess the most, confusion and the most amount of margins of error kind of come into play.
Now, with the whole process, who do you work the most with? Is it more the realtor? Is it more a mortgage broker if they're getting a mortgage, or is it more with the buyer-seller that is your client?
Yeah, I mean, typically our primary stuff, our primary people that we work with would be the agents. We're working with the agents a lot because they've already built a rapport with those clients. They know kind of where we're heading, who those clients are. So we get a lot of good information from our agents in terms of making sure it facilitates the transaction in as smooth of a, basically in a way as possible. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're dealing the most with the clients. I mean, that's who we're talking to, who's got questions during the process. But from a facilitation of the deal standpoint, making sure things go smooth, generally we're getting information and help from our agents.
Now, you had mentioned the attorney review period.
Yeah.
So how long does that last, and what's kind of like the deadline timeline on that?
Yeah, so it's the attorney review period is 5 business days from the date of acceptance. So essentially, you accept a deal today, which is today, Tuesday. It's going to be up next Tuesday, okay? And basically what that means is by the end of next Tuesday, I'm going to have to send out a letter. And that letter will either have to include buyer's modifications to the contracts or to the contract, any sort of inspection requests that they might have subsequent to an inspection, and or I'll have to send out an extension on their request or on their behalf, or things went south, wasn't going to work out, inspection was really bad, I can send a cancellation by the end of that attorney review period. And as long as I get some sort of communication out to the other side by that period, we're in good shape.
Now, with all of that processes that we have talked about so far,
Yep.
has anything changed or been just totally off the wall in the last year?
Yeah, I mean, our business was pretty remote. It's gotten a lot more remote, which is good and bad. My office, a lot of times, especially on Fridays, last Fridays of the month, that kind of last days of the month, that kind of thing, becomes my car. I'm driving from one closing to the next, answering phone calls, trying to do that while my staff is obviously taking care of things back at the office. But that sort of scenario playing out is still the same, but there's a lot of attorneys and a lot of people in general that have taken to a full remote where they're not even at closings or things, which has created a little bit of problems here and there. A lot of, it's just being conscientious of other people's time and knowing that there's people waiting on you to get documents over, or waiting on me, or waiting on somebody else involved in the transaction. And when they're remote, that feeling that someone's looking at you like, when's it coming type thing, doesn't always happen quite as quickly as it should. So to some degree, real estate's gotten a little bit more, I don't want to say difficult, but it's just new trials and tribulations because of the lack of in-person involvement. So that's something we try and, at least in our firm, we try and pride ourselves on, is being at the closing and making sure that, hey, the last taste that everyone has in their mouth was a good one.
Right. Now, with things going the way they have been in real estate, to where people are, houses are selling like day one on the market, has that made any change in that review period to where either people have more things they need to add, or it just goes smoother? Any change with that?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, it's swung it because buyers there's plentiful, interest rates where they were at. It created for a situation where everyone was competing for the same offers. Well, when you do that, then obviously the seller's going to sit there and say, oh, okay, I can accept from who I want and whatnot, and I don't have to do as much potentially. If anything, a lot more as-is offers, a lot more, hey, we're going to take it subject to whatever's in the property, we're fine. yeah, don't worry about fixing any of that stuff. We're good. And it obviously has created a lot of help for the sellers, and the fact that they're like, oh, we're going to get our money. We don't have to worry about doing anything. Perfect, we're in. So it's led to a lot more offers potentially dying or being canceled as a result of the fact that a buyer comes in, they were competing with 4 other people for this property, they got it, and then they send a laundry list of items to the other side, and the other side looks at it and is like, okay, well, we have 3 other potential offers. Let's just push this one aside, cancel that contract because they can do that, and then ultimately move on with one of these other offers. So it has led to a lot less requests from the buyer side to the seller side, or at least it should, and which is, I mean, creates a little bit more streamlines things a little bit too. So you don't have that power struggle.
Right, and it almost makes it easier to get the process through because people know, hey, there is a shortage of inventory, so you need to make sure you know exactly what you're getting into before you even submit the offer. Almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want to have so much more ducks in a row, and it all flies. It does go very quickly. So people get nervous sometimes when that sort of scenario plays out, and that's where doing your due diligence and reading. I can't stress it enough. And I try and stress it to myself in my own daily life of, you know what, I got something, I got to read this and know what is in here, because it's not always going to be where, even if somebody's there to tell you what it is, it might not be in the time frame that you need it, to make sure that, hey, you don't lose out on that offer, or hey, you don't just decide you don't want, there's another property that pops up and you waited too long, or just random things like that.
Now, has that had any effect on the timing of getting from contract to close?
A lot with lenders. It just with actually all areas. I mean, even we just dealt with it this morning. Surveys for properties. I mean, to get a survey done, a lot of survey companies are either not taking new orders, they're not taking new clients. So they're looking at 3-4 weeks to get a survey done. Wow. So just that being one element, well, a lot of times people want to close and they put an offer in, they want 30 days later. Well, 30 days is becoming a little bit more difficult in certain areas. And again, we try and make everything happen. But again, lenders can feel that pressure on a daily basis. And I'm sure pretty much any lender that's involved will speak a lot to that. But yeah, as long as they understand that when they put that 30-day date on that contract, that, hey, there's some things that might not play out, and it might be a little crunch for time in the end, and a little bit more of a Chinese fire drill type thing in the end. Hopefully, they just are understanding that it might end up needing to be 45 days to make sure that things close the way they're supposed to. And at the end of the day, that's the main and most important thing, is if everything goes smoothly, the best transaction was one that closes, and it doesn't come back until somebody's selling it again or doing something. The ones that come back later on because of an issue or a problem that wasn't seen, that's the most stressful times generally.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I mean, everyone's got to understand what we're dealing with right now, so that makes a lot of sense. Well, let me ask you this. You know, we've talked about a lot of different things, and not only just normal real estate closings and contracts, but then the changes we've seen in the last year. Mm-hmm. Anything we haven't talked about that you have found of interest, either of late or just people need to know in general?
Yeah, so we actually started in our office. We started asking our clients about closing dates. Do you like your closing date? Right in the beginning, and I wasn't shocked, I should say, but I was surprised at how many people didn't know what the closing date was that was on the contract. They were like, oh, was there one determined? And a lot of times it's because clients are doing it so quickly, they see a purchase price that they like, we're in. And that's the most important thing to them. No problem there. But obviously, we've noticed that a lot of the closing dates are just put on certain specific 15th, 30th, Fridays, and it leads to very congested closing days. And what ends up happening is I'll close, like, for instance, today I'll close 5 transactions, and then tomorrow I have none. And today's just a random Tuesday that it happens, but typically every Friday is going to have probably 4 or 5 transactions, and it creates a lot more kind of anxiety on those days because lenders are working on 5 different files, 10 different, 20 different files to close on that Friday, but the day before when it was Thursday, they were kind of hanging out like, well, we got one today, or whatever, waiting for the next day type thing to close those up. So I would say that if you want that special attention, which I think most people would. I know when I purchase property, I want it to be on the quietest possible day because then I know I've got everyone involved on my deal, making sure that everything is situated the way it's supposed to. And not to take away from the people that are closing on Fridays that they're going to get half service or anything. It just ultimately ends up being where there's just a little bit more kind of that quick attention to detail and talking to the people involved in your transaction immediately when it's not closing on those busiest days. So that's generally what I'm saying to a lot of agents and to a lot of clients is that pick a Wednesday, pick a Tuesday, and it'll all go smoothly.
That makes a lot of sense too, because also then you're not going to have to worry about running behind if the lender is busy doing something else or someone gets. Now that makes a lot of sense.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to real estate.
Yeah.
And as much as I like seeing those smiling faces at the end of closings and stuff, I've seen so many other faces too, and it's never really because anyone's screwed up or dropped the ball. It's just because things take time, and when you're needing somebody else to do something, and then subsequently that person's going to have to be triggered once that person does something. It's just that domino effect. It's the common phrase that a lot of real estate attorneys say when we're going on closings on a Friday and it's busy, and show up to the first one and the lender's package might not be there right away. Well, that ends up putting it back 30 minutes. Well, when I've got to get from one thing to the next, it's the thing where I just know the rest of the day, I'm sorry when I show up, I'm sorry for being late. So, and it unfortunately happens, and it creates a little bit extra stress, which when you're making a purchase of this size, you don't want any extra stress.
Right. No, definitely. Well, that was a lot of good information. We talked about a lot. I know there's a lot more we could talk about too, but we'll end there for today. Thank you for coming out. Obviously, as you can see, he's very, very knowledgeable in this. It's always a good idea to have an attorney when you're talking with a purchase of this magnitude or really any legal document. So if you want to get in contact with Matt, his contact information is below. Give him a call. He'd be more than happy to help you out with your purchase because this is a purchase that you should be doing for many, many years, if not the rest of your life, right?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for coming out.
Yep. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
No problem.